What in the world is that piece of junk, and what is it doing on my range? The voice, sharp and laced with the kind of arrogant confidence that only came from a freshly minted command, cut through the dry desert air. An old man, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and worn denim jeans, slowly turned from the rifle he was carefully cleaning. His hands, gnarled like the roots of an ancient oak, moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace over the polished wood and blued steel of a weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear, and fixed them on the officer striding toward him. Captain Derek Evans, commander of the base's elite Delta Force training detachment, stopped a few feet away, planting his hands on his hips. He was the very picture of a modern warrior. Sculpted physique visible beneath a sweat-darkened, moisture-wicking shirt, tactical pants with a dozen zippered pockets, and a pair of wraparound sunglasses perched on his head. His own rifle, a state-of-the-art Barrett MRAD chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, sat on a nearby bench, looking more like a piece of aerospace engineering than a firearm. "I asked you a question, Pops," Evans said, his voice loud enough for the half-dozen operators under his command to hear. They stopped their own activities, watching the confrontation with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "This is a restricted Tier 1 range. We're calibrating optics that cost more than your car. So I'll ask again, who are you, and what are you doing with that antique?" The old man finished wiping down the barrel of his rifle, a pre-1964 Winchester Model 70. He laid the cleaning cloth aside with the same meticulous care he'd used on the weapon itself. His movements were slow, but they held an economy of motion that hinted at a lifetime of practice. "Name's Silas," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble with a faint Midwestern drawl. "I have clearance to be here." Evans let out a short, derisive laugh. "Clearance? Buddy, the only thing you look cleared for is the early bird special at the diner. Let me see your ID." Silas reached into his back pocket and produced a worn leather wallet. He extracted a laminated card, its edges softened with age, and handed it to the captain. Evans snatched it from his hand. He glanced at it, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before the arrogance returned. The card was an old format, a type he hadn't seen before, but the photo matched the weathered face in front of him. The name read Silas Kane. Underneath, in a field marked status, were the words "Permanent Special Access, All Facilities." "This thing's probably expired by 20 years, Evans scoffed, though a note of uncertainty had crept into his tone. He tossed the card back onto the bench next to Silas's rifle. "Whatever. It doesn't matter. You can't be here while we're conducting live-fire exercises with experimental systems. It's a liability. Now pack up your relic and go." Silas didn't move. He picked up his ID card, inspected it for any new damage, and carefully placed it back in his wallet. His gaze drifted past the captain to the high-tech rifle on the adjacent bench. "Having trouble with the windage adjustments on the new variable zoom optic?" Silas asked, his tone purely inquisitive. "That cross-valley thermal layer can play tricks on the sensor suite. Throws the digital parallax correction off by a few clicks at this distance." Evans froze. His team had been struggling for the last hour to get a consistent group at 1,500 meters. The shots were scattering vertically, a problem their advanced ballistic computer should have been solving. He had been blaming the ammunition. The idea that this old man could diagnose the problem with a single glance was infuriating. "We are not having trouble," Evans snapped, his face flushing. "We are running diagnostic protocols. This is advanced systems integration, something you wouldn't understand. It's not like pointing and shooting that old deer rifle of yours." He gestured dismissively at the Winchester. "Did you bring that thing from the retirement home to show your grandkids? This isn't a place for show and tell." A young airman, a new recruit assigned to range maintenance, was watching from a distance. He was just a kid, barely 20, and the captain's open disrespect for the old man made his stomach clench. He'd seen Silas on the base before, always quiet, always keeping to himself. There was a stillness about him, a deep-seated calm that the airman found more intimidating than all of Captain Evans's bluster. Silas picked up the wooden-stocked rifle. He held it not like a tool, but like an extension of his own body. His gnarled fingers found their familiar places on the stock and receiver. "This rifle's been with me a long time," he said softly, almost to himself. It's never been a liability. The quiet dignity in the old man's voice seemed to enrage Evans even more. He stepped closer, invading Silas's personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne and exertion filled the air. You think you're some kind of old-school legend, don't you? Let me tell you how it works now, old-timer. We use data. We use technology. We have drones that can spot a target from 5 miles away and computers that can calculate a shot in a microsecond. Your kind of soldier is extinct. You're a fossil. He poked a finger at Silas's chest. You probably got your training in some forgotten war, shooting at targets that didn't shoot back. You have no idea what it takes to operate on the modern battlefield. We are the tip of the spear. You're just a dull, rusty memory. The finger pressing into his sternum seemed to trigger something in Silas. The arid landscape of the Nevada desert range dissolved. The dry heat was replaced by a suffocating, wet humidity. The distant pop-pop-pop of the Delta team's suppressed fire faded, replaced by the deafening chatter of an M60 machine gun and the sickening thwomp of incoming mortar rounds. He wasn't a 70-year-old man in a flannel shirt anymore. He was 25, gaunt and feverish, his tiger-striped uniform soaked through with sweat and monsoon rain. He was lying on a muddy ridgeline in the Ashau Valley, the stock of this very same Winchester pressed hard against his cheek. He was alone. His entire 5-man LRRP team had been ambushed and wiped out 2 days ago. He'd been wounded, a piece of shrapnel in his leg, and had been evading a battalion of NVA regulars ever since. They had him pinned down now, on a barren hill they called the Anvil. For 48 hours, they had thrown everything they had at him. He hadn't slept. He had 2 canteens of water and a handful of ammunition. But he had his rifle, and he had his post. They would not pass. He was the only thing between the enemy force and a compromised firebase several kilometers to the south. His radio was gone, shattered by a bullet. No one was coming for him. No one even knew he was still alive. He remembered the name they gave him later, the survivors from the firebase who had listened to the battle rage for 2 days and 2 nights, hearing the solitary, distinctive crack of his 30-06, answered by furious volleys of enemy fire. They heard that single rifle hold the line, its report as steady and unyielding as a blacksmith's hammer on steel. When the relief force finally broke through, they found him collapsed over his rifle, surrounded by the brass casings of over 100 precisely fired rounds and an even greater number of enemy dead. The young lieutenant who found him, pale with shock and awe, could only stammer one thing. He's like iron. An Iron Man, the name stuck, passed in whispers through the classified channels of the Studies and Observations group. Iron Mike. Hey, are you listening to me? The memory vanished. Captain Evans's angry face swam back into view. Silas blinked, the pale blue of his eyes seeming to hold a distant sorrow. He had not thought of that valley in years. The young airman, whose name was Peterson, couldn't take it anymore. He saw the captain's aggression, the physical contact, and the dazed, far-off look in the old man's eyes. This was wrong. It was fundamentally, profoundly wrong. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly. He had the personal cell number of the base command chief, a formidable senior master sergeant who had once given a briefing to all new arrivals. The chief had said, "If you ever see something that compromises the integrity of this base or the honor of the uniform, you call me. I don't care what time it is. I don't care who it is. You call." Peterson had thought it was just a speech. Now he realized it was a promise. He slipped behind a supply shed and dialed the number. "Chief, this is Airman Peterson out at Range 4. He whispered, his heart pounding. I think you need to get out here. Captain Evans from the Delta Detachment. He's harassing an old civilian. A really old guy. It's bad, Chief. Really bad." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Describe the civilian, Airman." "Old, sir. Maybe 70. Wears a flannel shirt. He has this old wooden rifle, and these really pale, clear eyes." The silence on the other end was suddenly heavy, electric. When the chief's voice came back, it was stripped of all warmth. It was cold, hard, and urgent. "Son, you stay out of sight. Do not engage. Do not say another word. I am handling this. Is the general on base today?" Yes, Chief. I think so. There was a briefing about his visit this morning." "Stay on the line, Peterson. Don't hang up." Peterson heard the muffled sound of the chief speaking to someone else with extreme urgency. Words like code black, compromised asset, and range 4 immediately floated through the phone. Peterson's blood ran cold. What had he just stumbled into? Back on the range, Evans had reached the end of his patience. The old man's silent endurance was more infuriating than any argument. It was a passive denial of his authority. "That's it. I'm done with you," Evans snarled. "You are a security risk and a trespasser. I want your name, your last unit, and your call sign. Now, you give me that, and maybe I'll just have you escorted out. You refuse, and I'll have you in a holding cell before you can blink." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "What was it? Pops? Grandpa? Come on, every soldier has a call sign. What was yours, you pathetic old man?" Silas looked at the captain. He saw not a man, but a boy playing dress-up in his father's uniform. A boy drunk on a little bit of power, terrified that someone might see he wasn't the giant he pretended to be. There was no anger in Silas's heart, only a profound sense of weariness and pity. "You don't want to know my call sign, son," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final warning. "Oh, I think I do." Evans sneered, reaching for his radio to call the military police. "I'm going to make sure everyone on this base knows it." It was then that the sound began. A low, rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder, vibrating in their chests. It wasn't the distant sound of jets from the main airfield. This was closer, much closer. Everyone on the range looked up. 360 Pavehawk helicopters were descending rapidly toward the range, not the landing pad. They moved with a predatory grace, their rotors beating the air into submission. Simultaneously, from the access road, a convoy of black Suburbans with flashing lights but no sirens raced toward them, kicking up a massive plume of dust. Evans stared, his jaw slack. This was not a standard patrol. This was a response. A major response. He thought it might be a drill, but the lead helicopter didn't slow down. It flared for landing just 50 yards from their position, its rotor wash blasting the range with a hurricane of sand and grit. The operators from the Delta team scrambled to secure their gear, their faces masks of confusion. The doors of the lead helicopter slid open before its skids had even fully settled. 2 Air Force pararescuemen in full combat gear jumped out and established a perimeter. From the black SUV that screeched to a halt beside them, the rear door flew open. A man emerged, tall and imposing, his uniform crisp and adorned with 4 stars on each collar. General McAllister, the commander of Air Combat Command, stepped out into the swirling dust, his face a granite mask of cold fury. He didn't even glance at the helicopters or the security cordon. His eyes scanned the range, passed over the stunned Delta operators, and locked onto the scene at the firing bench. Captain Evans, jolted out of his stupor, snapped to attention and threw the sharpest salute of his life. "General, Captain Evans, sir. Unexpected honor. We were just securing the range from a civilian intruder." General McAllister didn't acknowledge him. He didn't slow down. He walked straight past the saluting captain as if he were a piece of furniture. His polished black boots crunched on the gravel, each step a drumbeat of impending doom. He walked directly to the old man in the flannel shirt. He stopped 2 feet in front of Silas Kane. In the sudden, ringing silence as the helicopter engines began to spool down, General McAllister, one of the most powerful military officers in the world, brought his hand up to his brow in a salute so precise, so filled with profound respect, that it seemed to suck all the air from the range. The Delta operators stared, mouths agape. Airman Peterson, watching from behind the shed, felt his knees go weak. Captain Evans's arm, still held in its salute, began to tremble. Silas, who had remained standing, gave a slow, tired nod. It was the nod of an equal, not a subordinate. "Been a while, Mac," he said softly. General McAllister held the salute for a full 5 seconds before crisply lowering his hand. "Not long enough, it seems," he said, his voice tight with emotion. He turned, and the full force of his 4-star wrath fell upon Captain Evans. "Captain," the general's voice was deceptively calm, but it was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. "What is your name?" "Evans, sir. Derek Evans," he stammered, his face pale. "Captain Evans," the general began, his voice rising with each word. "You demanded this man's name and his call sign. You called him a fossil. You called him a pathetic old man. You threatened to have him arrested. You did this on a range bearing his name. a fact you were apparently too ignorant or too arrogant to learn. Evans's eyes widened in horror. The range was officially designated Advanced Marksmanship Sector 4, but its unofficial name, the one used by the old-timers and the base historians, was the Mike Range. You stand there in your $400 pants, holding a weapon system that exists only because of the data he bled for. The general continued, his voice now a thundering roar that echoed across the desert. You want to know his name? His name is Silas Kane, but you are not worthy to speak it. The general took a step toward Evans, who flinched as if struck. You demanded his call sign. You felt entitled to know the name he earned in blood and fire while your father was still in diapers. I will grant you your wish, Captain. I will tell you his call sign. McAllister turned back to Silas, his expression softening for a heartbeat before hardening again as he faced the captain. His call sign is Iron Mike. The name fell into the silence like a physical weight. The older operators on Evans's team, the ones who had been in the service for 15 or 20 years, exchanged shocked glances. They knew the name. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered in training schools and forward operating bases. It was the call sign of the greatest sniper the American military had ever produced. A man who had served in 3 wars, whose confirmed kill count was sealed at the highest levels of government, rumored to be in the high triple digits. A man who had written the book, literally written the sniper field manual, that every special operator from the SEALs to Delta Force still studied as gospel. Iron Mike, the general repeated, savoring the name. Not because he was hard, Captain, but because he was unbreakable. In 1968, in the A Shao Valley, his entire long-range reconnaissance patrol was wiped out. He, wounded and alone, held off an entire North Vietnamese Army battalion for 53 hours until a relief force could arrive. He did it with that relic you so casually dismissed. He pointed a trembling finger at the Winchester Model 70. That rifle has served in Vietnam. In Cold War operations you don't have the clearance to even read the file names for. And in the early days of the global war on terror, it has saved hundreds of American lives. It is not a relic. It is a registered national security asset. And he is a national treasure. McAllister's eyes bored into Evans. He holds the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars, and a Medal of Honor that was awarded in a classified ceremony in which he has never worn. He personally trained the founder of the unit you now so arrogantly command. He taught him everything he knew. He refused promotions. He refused accolades. He refused to sit behind a desk. All he ever wanted to do was serve. When he finally retired, he was given permanent special access as a consultant, free to go wherever he wished, to observe and to offer his wisdom. Wisdom you just spat on. The general's voice dropped again, becoming lethally quiet. You questioned his understanding of your advanced systems integration. Captain, Mr. Kane was part of the DARPA team that developed the foundational technology for the very optic you can't figure out how to operate. The thermal layering issue you're having? He wrote the white paper on that atmospheric anomaly in 1987. It's probably in the user manual, if you'd ever bothered to read it. Captain Evans was no longer standing at attention. His body had slumped, his face ashen. The swagger and arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a terrified, humiliated young man. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The general wasn't finished. To drive the point home, let's see what a fossil can do, he turned to Silas. Mike, would you mind? Silas gave a small shrug and walked to the bench. He picked up his rifle. He didn't use a bipod or a sandbag. He simply knelt, the movement surprisingly fluid for a man his age. He chambered a round from a small, worn box of cartridges he had loaded himself. What was the target you were having trouble with, Captain? The general asked without looking at him. A trembling Delta operator pointed. The 1,500-meter plate, sir. On the right. Silas raised the rifle. He didn't use a modern scope, but an old Unertl 8X optic, its brass tube tarnished with age. He settled the crosshairs, his breathing slowing until it was almost imperceptible. For a moment, he was perfectly still. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the Winchester cracked. It wasn't the deafening boom of the Barrett. It was a sharp, authoritative sound, like a bullwhip splitting the air. For a full 2 seconds, there was only the whistle of the bullet. Then, a faint ping echoed back across the valley. One of the operators, his eye pressed to a high-powered spotting scope, gasped. Hit. he whispered in disbelief. Dead center. It's dead center. Silas worked the bolt action with smooth, practiced efficiency, ejecting the spent casing, which landed softly on the gravel. He stood up and placed the rifle back on the bench. He had done it all in less than 10 seconds. The general let the silence hang for a moment, letting the lesson sink in. Then he turned back to Evans. You are relieved of your command, effective immediately. You will report to my aide. You will be reassigned to a supply depot in Thule, Greenland. You will spend the next 2 years of your career counting parkas and learning the meaning of the word humility. Your career as an operator is over. Master Sergeant, he called to one of his aides, take Captain Evans into custody and escort him from my sight. 2 imposing master sergeants stepped forward. As they reached for Evans's arms, a quiet voice stopped them. General, it was Silas. He had walked over and placed a gnarled hand on McAllister's arm. Mac, that's enough. The general looked at him, his fury still simmering. Mike, he dishonored you. He dishonored the uniform. He's a boy, Mac, Silas said, his pale eyes looking at the weeping captain. He's full of pride and arrogance. But that's what we teach them to be, isn't it? We wind them up and point them at the enemy. Sometimes they forget how to turn it off. He didn't know. He walked over to Evans, who looked up at him with red-rimmed, terrified eyes. Son, Silas said gently, this isn't about the gear. It never is. It's about the person behind it. Respect isn't in the rank on your collar. It's in your heart. You have to give it to get it, especially to those who came before you. They paved the road you're walking on. Evans could only sob, a choked, guttural sound of utter shame. Silas looked back at the general. Don't send him to Greenland. Don't ruin him. Teach him. Put him behind a desk somewhere he can read the histories. Make him learn what this is all really about. Then give him a second chance. Good men are too hard to find to throw one away over a mistake, even a big 1-inch. General McAllister stared at Silas for a long moment, his expression a mixture of awe and profound respect. He saw not just the legendary soldier, but the deep well of grace and forgiveness that made the man a true giant. He nodded slowly. As you wish, Mike, he looked at Evans. You heard him. You have been granted a reprieve by a man you are not fit to stand in the shadow of. Don't you ever forget it. Weeks later, the story of what happened at Range 4 had become an institutional legend. Captain Evans, humbled and changed, was serving a temporary assignment in the base archives, tasked with digitizing the service records of veterans from Korea and Vietnam. He spent his days reading about men like Silas Kane, and his arrogance was slowly being replaced by a deep and abiding respect. Silas was occasionally seen back at the range, not as a consultant, but as a teacher. He would sit with the young Delta operators, his old Winchester across his lap, and talk to them. He didn't talk about war or killing. He talked about patience, about breathing, about knowing the wind as if it were an old friend, and about the quiet responsibility that came with their extraordinary skills. The greatest lessons are rarely taught in a classroom or shouted by a drill instructor. They are often delivered in quiet moments, by quiet men who have seen enough of the world's noise to appreciate the value of silence, wisdom, and a little bit of grace. They remind us that the measure of a warrior is not the technology they wield or the rank they wear, but the content of their character and the respect they show to all. Stories like these are a powerful reminder of that truth, which is why it's so important to share them and keep these lessons alive. If you agree, subscribe and pass this on, ensuring these legacies of honor are never forgotten.